a crowd, what a wonderful crowd that we have today. And a lot of work is due to many people, but in particular, April Frazier Camara, who will follow me. She is the first vice chair of the ABA Criminal Justice Section. I'm the chair-elect, and we're lucky to have today with us Lucien Durvin, who is a professor at Belmont School of Law, and he is here as the chair this year of the Criminal Justice Section Council. So, Lucien, if you'd stand up and just say hi. So today, you'll see some agendas and biographies on your table, as well as the small book gives the entire program for the next few days while the ABA Criminal Justice Section is here in Nashville. And we have, for today, an outstanding program with some exceptional speakers, all women, who are fearless and dedicated and committed to the profession of criminal justice. And they have succeeded in many ways that you will hear about today. One of the things that we want and hope to do today is have a very interactive event where people can share their stories, their own lived experiences. Let me tell you about in general, some of the diverse individuals that we will have here. I'm going to rely on the biographies to further explain who they are, but you will find that today there is a multi-generational group of women. There are women from all forms of practice, from prosecutors, defenders, we have jurists, we have authors, we have others that are acting in professional capacities in the criminal justice as support. We also have professors, and you'll look to and know that they're coming from all different practices, and maybe you're here today from even something a little bit different. Each of you have your own story, and we're hopeful today that you tell it to us. So one of the things I want to give you is a little bit of history about how this happened, and some of you may know Hillary Bass. Hillary Bass, in 2017, as the president of the greater ABA, determined that it was important to do a study about why women leave the practice of law in general. And you may have read quite a bit about that. But you will know that the top 3 reasons that women leave is financial challenges, work-life balance, and also implicit bias. And so we're going to discuss those things today. We're going to discuss those things. Do any of you have a notion as to why women stay in practice? Because they succeed. When they have a level of success, they stay. And so today, we hope, later in the day, you'll see on the program that we're going to bring back, after some of our panels, our first panel is discussing the day in the history of the life of a criminal justice practitioner. We'll have a session, a breakout session on implicit bias. We're going to have a breakout session on shattering the glass ceiling. And finally, we'll bring those back at the end of the day through a town hall as well, a white-collar town hall. So stick with us and give us an opportunity to share our stories and find solutions. So after Hillary Bass did this study and shared it, Justine Luongo, who is the chief defender in the legal aid of New York City, supervising over 1,100 employees, if you can imagine that. And Carla LaRoche, professor of law at Florida State University, decided to petition Lucien Durvin for a Women in Criminal Justice Task Force to have and hold listening sessions across the United States. And some of the women here are part of that task force. And they are doing that, collecting data, and in hope to move forward, finding solutions for the many challenges that face women in the criminal justice practice. So once Lucien said yes, a big positive hoorah, then April Frazier got the three of us together, myself and Lucian, and we have a 3-year commitment to continuing this symposium. So I hope that as this inaugural year continues, that we will see you all in the next couple of years. There's been a long history as part of the ABA criminal justice section in their commitment to diversity and inclusion. So I want to share with you one of the solutions that I feel is so necessary for us to look to is the inclusion of men in these discussions. And we have a few over here. Oh, we do have a couple on this side too. So maybe 5 count or something like that. But we want to welcome you today because men are essential in this discussion in ensuring that women are allowed to have the opportunities, encouragement, and support necessary to help them meet the challenges along with all of us working together as women to meet the challenges we face. So my simple story, it's not a story where I was, someone was biased against me in any way. Raised as a farm kid in southeast Kansas, I grew up thinking, like many women, girls in that capacity, that I could do everything that a boy could do. And I was required to, because I was on a farm. And you just did the same things that the boy did in order to make things work. But then as the first person in my family to get a college degree and a law degree, while I was in law school, I thought, well, I need a few jobs to get me through. And one of the jobs I looked at was an internship in the district attorney's office in Topeka, Kansas. But when I found out about it, I went to the office to apply. We've already filled those positions. We don't have a position for you. So thinking back about a story my grandfather told me in the Depression, when they had no money, pushing a broom across a garage so that maybe the guy that owned the garage would throw him a nickel. And one day, he did. So using that story, I asked the boss at the DA's office if I could just work there, just start working there, with a can-do attitude, which is the mantra of Judge Langford Morris. And so I did. I started working at that office, and some other young male intern did not want to have to do a misdemeanor jury trial. So I volunteered. And I went. They teach you a lot of things in law school, but not how to pick a jury. So I went to the state law library. They did luckily have a book about how to pick a jury, so I read it over the weekend. And that Monday morning, I started my misdemeanor jury trial. I won. How in the world? I do not know. I can't even remember. But when I stepped back, I didn't tell anybody, really. Didn't have anybody to talk to. I didn't have a supervisor. I wasn't getting paid. I was just there doing trials, right? But I saw the boss for the first time, the DA. And he came up to me as I was getting off the elevator, and he grabs me like this. Now, you'll have to pardon me. Remember, this is like in the early 80s. He grabs me and he goes, "Are you that little gal?" I was littler then. That just won that jury trial. He said, "Are we paying you anything?" And I said, "No." "Well, honey," and I about fell over, "we are now." And so I use that story in my own mind to think about those places where there are barriers. And my own way to bust them is just to move forward until And in those stories, I highlight them today because they were all information that I gleaned from men, and men who assisted me in that moment. Do they always know? And your story may be very different, but we want to hear it today. All right, let's go. April?
All right, good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
Okay, I'm originally from Tennessee, and I'm a Baptist girl, so I need some audience participation. Good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
All right, so we're really excited today. I really, it's an honor for me to stand before you today to present and really be a part of what will be the first Women in Criminal Justice Symposium. And I am just making sure my PowerPoint presentation is the right one. So we're really excited to have you here today, and we're really, first of all, I would like to, Kim already mentioned our current chair, Lucien Duran, but I also want to say a special thank you to Steve Salzberg, who is in the room, who has been a great leader and mentor personally to me. But we're very grateful for the support from the ABA Criminal Justice leadership in supporting diversity and inclusion issues, and specifically supporting this symposium, which is a full day focused on issues facing women in the criminal justice profession. So we're really excited today, and we have a full day of programming, but Kim mentioned it as she shared her story. This is really a day where we wanted to be interactive. We want to hear from you, and we actually want to talk a lot this afternoon is dedicated to solutions, because we want this day to be focused on a reflection of all of the great contributions that have been made in the field of criminal justice by women. But we also want to be very honest about the remaining barriers and challenges that we face. And we hope that you will walk away today with solutions. So not just looking at barriers and acknowledging them, but to walk away with very practical tips that you can take back and apply, perhaps in your own office, but even in your own community. So I wanted to just provide you with an overview before we introduce our panel, to really explain to you what the goals are for the opening plenary. So we really wanted to start the day off by reflecting on the power of women, the diversity of women in criminal justice. You'll hear from defenders, prosecutors, our judiciary. But we will also talk about how women meet the challenges within the criminal justice system, and which I think is really important to do. So as you can see from images here, this is a question for the audience. So who does the criminal justice system fear the most?
Can we answer?
Yes.
Women.
Women.
What they do.
So what we found, you can see images here of women, the mothers of people who were slain in the criminal justice system. You also see images of the image in your far left is from Atlanta, Georgia, images of women who are in all parts of the Atlanta municipal criminal justice system, and also our own leaders, Tina Luongo and Carla, who's leading our ABA Women in Criminal Justice Task Force. But we know the power of women, but I wanted us to start out with a little humor, because it's morning, and so it's really important. So I'm going to play for you this slide that really talks about the power of women, specifically the power of feminism. Who loves Trevor Noah? Let's listen to him for a second.
But we have and you must remember, because of so many of the struggle leaders in South Africa were either imprisoned or exiled, the movement in South Africa was held together in large part by women in the country. And so it's weird for me, because I understand you travel the world, you understand that everywhere feminism is different and the idea of women is different. But I grew up in a world that was very matriarchal and where women were the most dangerous freedom fighters that existed. No, it's true. You read up on Winnie Mandela. Like, Nelson Mandela was an icon, but the police in the country were afraid of Winnie Mandela. You know, they were, and we had a phrase in South Africa that was, we still use it today, which was "Watinta bafazi, watintimbo woko," which means you strike a woman, you strike a rock. And that's what I grew up learning. It was cool, man. It was fire. It was fire. And a lot of the time my mom would strike me with a rock.
Right, but I thought it was a great, it was really a great reminder of the power of women. And we are a powerful force, and today we're going to talk about their work. So if you're like me, perhaps when you growing up in the South, I saw a lot of images of civil rights leaders and freedom fighters who encouraged me to be a public defender. But many of those images were of men. Of course, we all think of Thurgood Marshall. You may think of Dr. Martin Luther King and others who really led the civil rights movement in the 1960s. But we have missing images as well. Oftentimes the images of women and the stories of women are not told. And that's what we will focus on today during this symposium, making sure that the voices of women in criminal justice, specifically people who impact the future of criminal justice and how we practice, those stories are heard. So as we all know, the Me Too movement has really brought attention to a lot of issues facing women in the workplace. But we also know that the women of criminal justice are also told by those directly impacted by the criminal justice system. So people like Sandra Bland and others who have lost their lives through contact with the criminal justice system, we also know that their voices also must be a part of our story when we talk about women in criminal justice. While we have been able to make a lot of progress over the last 40 and 50 years, not only within the criminal justice system, but the legal profession in general, we know that there is still a lot of work to do. Although we see a lot of women in local prosecutors' offices and public defender offices, we still don't see enough women in leadership positions. So when you look across the office, you will see diversity, oftentimes at the entry level within those offices. But when you get to chief defenders and the lead prosecutors, oftentimes we see those positions of leadership still very male dominated. And of course, we cannot have a conversation about women in criminal justice without talking about pay equity. This is a recent study that came out last week on Equal Pay Day about the disparity that we see between women and men in the workplace. And while we know that women in general make 80 cents on the dollar compared to men in the workplace, it's even more startling when we look at women of color. We see that Asian women are at 0.85 per dollar. We see that the pay gap for white women is at 0.77 cents per dollar. For African American women, it's 0.61. For Native American women, it's 0.58. And for Latina women, it's 0.53. So when we think about those disparities in general concerning women, they're startling. But when we dig even deeper and look at women of color, it's even more troubling. So, today we're going to talk about what is the role of a criminal justice attorney, specifically women in criminal justice. We're going to talk today about daring greatly and really having the courage to look for solutions and be trailblazers in the field of criminal justice. And we understand that a lot of the gains that we've seen in the workplace over the last few years is because a lot of women have made great sacrifices by not allowing other people to define their possibilities, like the story shared by Cam, but rather they define them for themselves. So, without further ado, we are going to, I want to introduce our panel, and we're going to talk about the work of the panelists inside and outside of the courtroom. So first we have Martesha Johnson, who is the elected Nashville Metropolitan Public Defender. And while typically we don't read bios, I am going to read them today because as we learn from our research of women in criminal justice, oftentimes women are the last ones to promote ourselves and to give ourselves the true accolades that we deserve. So, Martesha Johnson is the newly elected Nashville Metropolitan Public Defender. She's the first African American to be elected in this position. She has a heart for serving people and was determined to be the public defender since completing her internship with the Nashville Public Defender's Office in 2007. She's devoted her entire career to public defense and believes that people are worth more than the worst thing that they ever have done. During her tenure at the Public Defender's Office, she has served in numerous leadership capacities. She served as the training director and a member of the Special Litigation Unit, primarily focused on serious felony representation. She has been the team leader in 2 criminal courts, summer intern coordinator, member of the hiring committee, and the member of several committees designed to review office policies and make recommendations for approval. She is a graduate of Tennessee State University and also the University of Tennessee Knoxville School of Law. So let's welcome Martesha. So actually, I wanted to start out with a question for you because when I think of progress within the criminal justice profession, I really think of you. And of course, I'm somewhat biased because I'm a fellow Tennessee State University graduate. But you really truly are an amazing figure of someone who is breaking barriers within the field of public defense. But also, you're a very young professional who's also balancing being a working mother and being a trailblazer in the legal profession. So, Martesha, can you talk a little bit about your recent election and what it means to be the first Black woman elected in this position, and how do you balance that with also being a mother?
I'm very grateful for the position that I'm in, for the opportunity to serve in this way. I was very terrified at the thought of running for office. It was not something that came to me naturally. All I could think about when the opportunity presented itself was all the reasons that I shouldn't do it, mainly because I didn't come from a political background. I wasn't fortunate to come from a lot of money, and I am a working single mother of a young child. So I thought about all of those things and continuously said no at first. But I just continued to think about sort of, if not now, then when. And so that really spoke to me, and it took a lot of courage, I would say, for me to eventually decide, no matter what happens, I'm gonna step out here and do this new thing. And it was really great. I think the honor is both a wonderful honor, but comes with incredible pressure, being the first African American to serve in this way. And the reason I say that is because I can recall, as a child, my mother really instilled in me the importance of knowing my history and also being reflective of my history and making sure that I am honoring those who came before me at all times. And so knowing that so many of my African American brothers and sisters who fought for equal justice and fought for the right to do things and fought for the right to vote, who are no longer with us, and yet here I am in this awesome position as the first Black woman, first African American in this city to hold this position is a great honor, but also comes with incredible responsibility, because I feel like I owe it to them to continue to be a trailblazer, to use my voice to promote the tenets that I stand for, equality and justice for all, but also to make sure that I'm not the last African American or young person or working mother that holds this position. It is very challenging to be a mother. It's definitely very challenging to be a single mother in this role. But I decided very early on the campaign trail that I didn't want my daughter to be fearful of running for office. And I didn't want her to have some of the same struggles and boundaries that I did. And so I took her with me from day one. I decided that I wanted people who were going to be voting for me and supporting me to see who I was. And so whenever you saw me, you saw that 7-year-old then, now 8-year-old accompanying me on the campaign trail. She introduced me at events. She stood with me as I got sworn in. And so I think that it was important for me to show her that with courage, you can do anything, but also to show the world that just because I'm young, just because I'm a mom, doesn't mean that I can't hold this position and do it well.
Wonderful. It's so inspiring to hear about when you talk about running for office and really your commitment to public service. So I'm going to go to the Honorable Anna Escobar, who is currently a judge in General Sessions Court, recently in that position in August 2018. Judge Escobar was born in Colombia, South America, and became a U.S. citizen when she was 12 years old. She and her family have lived in Nashville, Tennessee for over 40 years. Judge Escobar earned her college degree from Vanderbilt University and graduated from the National Law Center at George Washington University in Washington, D.C. And prior to her election, Judge Escobar practiced law in Nashville from 1995, serving as an assistant public defender, assistant district attorney, a solo practitioner, metro clerk, deputy director for the administrative offices of the court. So as you can hear from her bio, your passion for public service is really evident and apparent. And I would love to hear, we would like to hear about a project that you created, was responsible for developing, which is called the Civic Academy here in Nashville. Can you share more about that?
Thank you. First of all, welcome to Nashville. I'm a little biased, but I think this is a wonderful place to be. So thank you, and for bringing the sunshine too. So as you said, I've grown up here in Nashville, and I had the honor of being the Metro Clerk for our Metro Council. We actually have the 3rd largest Metro Council or council in the United States. It's 40 members. So I was the clerk for them. And as I did that job, a lot of leadership groups came through there, and they got the opportunity to meet our city's leaders and learn more about the programs. And it struck me that, you know, new Americans, neighborhood leaders weren't getting those same opportunities. So I took the idea to our then Mayor Carl Dean, who actually was the public defender who hired me back in 1995. So it's very incestuous here in this town. And I said, what if we did a leadership program for new Americans so that they could learn about our different departments and services? Because for me, knowledge is power. Because we often get frustrated with our government, but the problem is we don't know where to go to get to access what services we need, so we get frustrated. So we created something called My City Academy. It was for 8 months, and each month the class tours different parts of the city, for instance, infrastructure, education, government, criminal justice, different like I said, entities of the government, and they get to know the leaders, the department heads, they get phone numbers. So the thought is for them to go out into their community and spread the word. The wonderful thing about this has been that it has created a great alumni network, and from there the city has been able to ask some of those leaders to be part of boards and commissions for the city, thus diversifying it. I'm proud to say that it was part of a white paper during the Obama administration, and I think several cities have come here to try to replicate it. So I'm very excited about that. So.
Wow. And Judge Escobar, I wanted you to highlight that and share with the audience, because when we think about the contributions of women in criminal justice, it's not just limited to the courtroom. We do great work in our communities to advance the pillars of our democracy, and I think it's so important for people to hear about all of the work that oftentimes is not talked about in our resumes or bios. So thank you for the program, and thank you for your service to Nashville.
Thank you.
So next we have the Honorable Denise Langford Morris, who is an active member of the criminal justice section. And she has an amazing bio, being the first African-American elected in Oakland County, Michigan, which is a suburb outside of Detroit, Michigan. She was in private practice with extensive experience in civil and criminal law on both the state and federal level. She's a former Oakland County Assistant Prosecuting Attorney, also a former Assistant U.S. Attorney for the Eastern District of Michigan. She's a founding member of the D. Augustus Stryker Bar Association in Michigan, and also a former governing board member of the Michigan Judges Association. So if I continue reading, we may not get to the question, but she has an extensive resume, and I consider her a mentor. And so I'm really excited to have her join us today on the panel. And Judge Langford Morris, I would like for you to talk about being the first African-American woman elected in Oakland County, and also being the first African-American woman to run for the Michigan Supreme Court. But can you share insight about why it's so important for women to focus on leadership positions within the criminal justice and legal profession?
Thank you so much, April. I appreciate the warm introduction. It's my honor to be here with the Criminal Justice section for our Spring Institute. We have a great chair. He's been highlighted once, but we really appreciate the Women's Task Force, and I'm enjoying my work with the task force. So I'm looking forward to this continuing, and as President-elect, or what do we call it, Chair-elect, indicated, this will continue for 3 years. So I'm really looking forward to participating at some point in the future. As April indicated, my resume is long. That's because I've been here a while. In fact, I'm in my 27th year on the bench. And I serve in Oakland County, Michigan, which people get it confused when they think Oakland, California, but it's Oakland County, Michigan, and it is the county just north of the county where Detroit sits. And in that county, it is the wealthiest county in Michigan, and before the recession, it was the 4th wealthiest county in the country. And so I don't know where it is now, but it really is a special place to serve. I started out really as a prosecutor in that county, and that's what put me in a posture where I could submit my name as an applicant for appointment to the bench. And quite frankly, I don't think you can win as an African American in Oakland County unless you are appointed first and then running for election as an incumbent. And we have full-blown elections. It's a real election. The last election where we were contested was 2012. The opponents were assistant attorney generals. 2 of them ran against the sitting 5 judges, and whoever's the top 5 wins. So they had $3.5 million in dark money. that they spent against the sitting judges. I was one. There were 2 African Americans. There's only 2 on my bench. And so I think they were really targeting the other one. I don't think they thought that they could get me because I've been there too long and I'm really active in my county. But the other thing is it put us in a position where we realized that you really have to have some money. We raised like $400,000, that's all we had, not one commercial, and they were blasting us constantly with those commercials. So I just want to lay that background, because when I walked into the Oakland County Prosecutor's Office in 1984, there were no jobs for anyone in the practice of law. I had been a licensed attorney for a year, still working at the Department of Social Services, where there were no jobs. No one was hiring. It was similar to this last recession. So someone called me, my friend who lived here in Nashville recently and just passed away at Vanderbilt, the director of athletics. He and I were moot court partners. He called me and he said, Denise, he said, Oakland County is hiring. I said, where is Oakland County? He said, it's Pontiac. I said, oh, okay, go out to Pontiac. So I found my way to the interview and I got hired. And when I walked in the Oakland County Prosecutor's Office, there wasn't one African American secretary, lawyer, boss, nothing. And in fact, there were very, very few women, hardly any women. There were no women at the circuit court level trying cases. I mean, it really was a different place. And I found out after I went for the interview that the prosecutor at the time was the anti-busing, had run against his own boss and beat him. And that was the case that Damon Keith had with the Pontiac busing case. It's a long story. But anyway, that's how I started. And so, but it was that job. It was the fact that I took the job and met so many people in the county that I was able to submit my name to the conservative governor who actually appointed me, John Engler. And someone said to me recently, well, that was a fluke. I said, oh no. I said, it was a determined effort. I said, we can't sit back and wait for there to only be a Democrat governor, only be whatever. We have to at least apply. And I am a founder of the Black Bar Association, the D. Augustus Draker Bar. That was our #1 goal. We wanted to have one African American countywide sentencing felons and being involved at the circuit court level. And so that was our goal. I never thought it would be me. I wasn't really interested. I had a great job at the U.S. Attorney's Office, Civil Division, but I put my name in because I knew that I had the qualifications, and my bosses and so many people encouraged me. And it was kind of the same thing. You know, was I shocked? I was one of 27 people that applied. I don't think there was any other person that was any more qualified than me. And in addition, that helped me when I decided to put my name in to run for the Michigan Supreme Court. I actually got nominated by the Democratic Party. So I wasn't the first African American to run for the Supreme Court, but I was the first to ever be nominated by any party, African American woman, by either party, the Republicans or the Democrat. We had someone that put their name on the ballot, but no chance of winning. You have to be nominated by a party in Michigan, even though you're on the ballot as quote unquote nonpartisan. So that's another whole session that we could have on that craziness. But at any rate, it really is an effort when you are the first. I was telling a story to April recently. You know, when I started in the prosecutor's office, I had the nerve to show up one day in a dress, and I was told, don't wear dresses. You can't wear a dress. You have to have on a suit. It has to be like a business suit. And back then, in the early 80s, women were actually wearing ties, and we were trying to look as much like we had on the black pinstripe and those kinds of things. I mean, that was what we were doing. We would try to blend in. And, you know, those are some of the things that I have experienced. Certainly, I could go on and on, but it's a dangerous thing when you give a microphone to a lawyer versus a judge. So I'm going to be quiet now.
Okay.
Go ahead, April. It really is, there's a lot. There's
Yes.
just a lot.
So I really appreciate Judge Langford Morris. We're going to talk a little bit about dress and decorum. So, because it is interesting to hear from people from different generations in their response to it, which is, yeah, I can't wait for that question. And we will want audience interaction when we get around to it. But last but definitely not least is Rachel Pickering, Assistant Solicitor General from Topeka, Kansas. Shout out to Kansas. Come on. Rachel is an Assistant Solicitor General at the Kansas Attorney General's Office since January 2018. Prior to that, she was an Assistant District Attorney in Shawnee County District Attorney's Office, where she prosecuted criminal felony cases. In addition, she has also served as a criminal defense attorney at both the trial and appellate levels, handling criminal defense appeals for 8 years. She earned her bachelor's degree in history from the University of Missouri, St. Louis, and a law degree from University of Missouri, and a year-long break from the practice. She also took a year-long break from the practice of law to stay home with her newborn, and upon her return, she chose to practice criminal law. So I just wanted to share a little bit about both her professional and personal background, because I think it definitely shapes your perspective. So Rachel, I want to hear about your experience practicing both sides. So you've been both a prosecutor and a defense attorney. So can you share with us how it has shaped your perspective and the way you practice law?
Absolutely. So now I've gone basically full circle. And the basis that I started was with criminal appeals defense, which was outstanding because those 8 years gave me my foundation of criminal law. If anybody does appeals, you're learning to write, and you're working on your oral argument skills. So with that job we handled all the appeals for all the counties of Kansas, so 105. And so you had a spectrum of all felony cases, murder cases, sex crime cases. But you also had the opportunity to argue at the Kansas Supreme Court and Court of Appeals. And when you're handling those many cases, you're learning to write fast but argue well. And so we were able to get in front of the Kansas Supreme Court many times. The reason why I start there is it goes with a quality that women have, which is persistence. And when you're doing criminal appeals, you are trying to move the needle. You are saying how the law should be changed. And with that, I tell people working there was like the Greek or Roman character Sisyphus, who takes the stone. Any public defenders up here would understand this? You're moving the stone up the hill, right? And Tina, right? And it falls back down. And then you move it up. Yeah, so I'm like, oh, I won this case, and the court's going to distinguish it the next time. So that's so the quality that I believe we bring to the table for that is creativity. I was thinking outside the box, the persistence. And then that moves to prosecution as a trial. So when you walk into I'm going to stick with criminal defense. When you walk from appellate, where your clients are in prison, to public defender, where your clients are just down the block at the local jail, there's a completely different dynamic. And I'm going to stand for a second. When you meet your defendant, you'll understand this. I learned that I had to do the alpha female stance as he's walking down because I had to show him I'm in charge. And that was critical from day one that I learned as a criminal defense. And he's like, he gets it. But then we would sit down and I would say, tell me about who you are, so I could understand where we wanted to be at the end of the day. But that's something that I don't know if men have to work with, but as a female, I learned I had to have that stance to show him or her, we've got this, you're okay, and to show that I know what I'm doing. moving that then to prosecution. Prosecution, my friend said, Rachel, how can you go to prosecution? You advocate for your client. And I said, well, now I'm going to be advocating for the victim. So that is the part when you would bring the victim in. That's very important. And when you're, as a prosecutor, I always tell people I'm telling the victim story. Criminal defense attorneys learn they're telling their client's story. Now as prosecutor, I'm going to be telling what happened from the victim's point of view. And then now I'm doing criminal appeals, which is interesting. And so sometimes my defense attorney hat comes on in a sense that I will see something and I will point it out of that's not right. We need to get that fixed. But also as a prosecutor, you have just, I talked to you about the creativity as a defense. Now as a prosecutor doing appeals, you get to be creative. You get to be creative in how you respond back to the arguments. So I see that they're pushing the needle. I know where they're going, and I'm going to push back. So thank you.
So thank you, Rachel. I think your perspective on both sides is very helpful. I know we have people in the room who may be trying to figure out their path in criminal justice, and so your perspective is very valuable. So I'm going to ask a question to the entire panel, and you all have about 2 minutes to weigh in because I want to open it up to the audience where we can spend our last 30 minutes together really doing Q&A and having more of a dialogue. But the question is, what advice would you give to your 20-year-old self or to a young woman who is entering the criminal justice practice?
I guess for me, the advice I would give to my 20-year-old self is to just do it. Trust myself, trust that I am able to accomplish my goals, and not let sort of my background and places that I came from and all of the I didn't have shape who I was. Because I spent a great deal of time being fearful about, I can't go to law school, there aren't any lawyers in my family. I can't take the LSAT because I can't pay for a LSAT prep class. I can't do all of these things, and so I would tell myself to shift that can't do mindset to what I can do, because everything that I have set my mind and my heart and put my ability toward, I have been able to accomplish. So I would certainly just encourage me to spend less time on the negative and more time on the positive. And what I would tell a young person entering this profession is that resilience is key. We have come a long way, I guess, for women in this field, but there are still challenges and barriers and things that we have to experience that is exclusive to being a woman in the legal field. And so I would just encourage people to be resilient and also look to the tribe of people who are already doing this for support.
I would say not to wish your life away, like to actually enjoy what you're doing in the moment, learn from the people that you're being surrounded by, and try to learn as much as you can by your current situation. I also would say don't sweat the small stuff. I look back at the things that made me so anxious and upset when I was younger, and really they were nothing. And the last thing I would say to myself, which I've learned in my older age, is to be uncomfortable. Because by being uncomfortable, you challenge yourself. But if you're always comfortable, you're always going to be in your safe little space. So, for instance, public speaking is not my favorite thing, but here I am.
You're doing a great job.
Well, I would say, number one, you really want to be determined. And I guess 20 is a little bit young, but I do a lot of mentoring with students, law students, and young lawyers. And I say be determined, but also set your goals. You've got to really have a conversation with yourself as to where do you want to be in 1 year? Where do you want to be in 5 years? Where do you want to be in 20? And what I say is on your birthday, or you pick whatever day it might be, go back and revisit those goals. And then you've got to set a plan. Have a mentor or someone that's going to help you reach that next goal point. And you've got to check it over and over. I kind of go back on my birthday and say, where am I going to be next year at this time? Spend a little time with myself. And when you find those mentors by being active in your chosen profession, if you get out there and are active, then you're going to meet people that are where you want to be. And you just have to ask, you know, be determined to go up to them, ask them for help, find out how they got there. And then that way you can make your path.
Fail. I would tell people, is this working? I'm a big believer of failure. There is power in fail because you're learning. And that goes to your, Judge, what you talked about being uncomfortable. You're going to fail. And when you tell a 20-year-old, go ahead and fail, they will reject, they will hate that. What? But learning from your mistakes is, I learn more from my mistakes than my successes. But you have to take a deep breath and analyze it and say, what did I do wrong? Why did I lose that trial? What did I do to get that jury not to like me from day one? So little things like that. How could I have briefed this issue better? So to me, failure is very important. And that whole adage, you learn from your mistakes. Yeah, but failing, man, makes you take a step back and analyze and go forward. And that goes with that. What I would tell somebody is you define success. So you will look back, and when you start comparing yourself to others, I'm not doing all that they're doing, that's okay. Let them have their success, but you will define your own success. And that could be how you, what you give back to the legal community. So just remember there's many different ways of success, and you get to define it.
All right. So let's give our panel a round of applause. So now is my favorite part, where we actually have a conversation. And so we want to spend the last 30 minutes taking questions from the audience. And specifically, so I'm just going to throw a topic out there. So Judge Denise raised the issue of decorum and dress. So do we have any opinions from our audience about a woman's role within the criminal justice profession? And is there a certain decorum or dress code that we should adhere to? So I'm playing professor, so I'm not going to give you the answer. I want to hear from the audience, of course. Okay, so we got someone over here, and then we're going to hear from Tina.
So you can hear from an old timer first. I remember, gosh, it was probably 30 years ago, or at least 25 years ago, and I was, actually it's been longer than that. It'd have to be 30 years ago. I don't think I was even in the U.S. Attorney's Office. I remember hearing through the grapevine that one of our male district judges had a female attorney from Chicago trying a case in his courtroom, and he was like putting the word out that everybody should come and watch this woman because she was so impressive. I can't tell you her name, unfortunately. I don't remember that. There's only some of the memory that I have still left here. But she was just really fantastic. He was very impressed with her. She was aggressive. She was a go-getter. She was really good. And she wore pants. Now, he didn't say that, but I mean, that was the thing that really struck me. So when I started out, you know, you wore hose, you wore skirts, you wore dresses. Nobody wore pants. In fact, there was a judge, for anybody who's here from Nashville, I don't think anybody maybe is of my era yet, but there was a judge who did all the domestic relations cases, Judge Trimble, and nobody, not even witnesses, could come in his courtroom, females in pants. They had to all wear dresses. And so I worked at Legal Services. You had to tell your clients, do not come to court in pants. You cannot go. He will not let you in his courtroom. If you come there, you've got to come in a skirt. This was a long time ago, but we started out that way. for a long, long time, I continued to wear skirts or skirt suits to try cases. And it's only recently, I'd say within the last 10 years, I felt comfortable wearing pants, suits to court, to jury trials. And I feel very comfortable doing that. But I had a conversation with a young woman, somebody in her early 30s in my office this past week, who says she still does not feel comfortable wearing pants in front of a jury, which I find interesting. So I'm interested in hearing what you all have to say about it. I wear whatever I want to wear. And I think it's because of frightening age, and I'm older, I have more money, and whatever. I'm going to wear what I want to wear. If I feel comfortable in it, I'm hoping they're going to think that it's okay, because if I feel comfortable doing what I'm doing, then I'm going to be sincere, I'm going to be who I am, and that's the best way to be, I think.
Great, and so we're going to hear from Tina. So just my personal experience attending Howard University School of Law. It was, Howard is a historically black college and university, but very conservative in their approach. And I remember being a first-year law student, interviewing for on-campus interviews, and I had on the blue suit. I did wear the blue suit, but I had on camel brown pumps. And the director of career services pulled me in her office and gave me a lecture on I have to wear dark shoes, I have to wear the uniform in order to get the job. And so on that particular day, I made a conscious effort to defy all of the rules. And I decided, if you don't want to hire me because of my camel color pumps, then that's not a place that I would want to work anyhow. So I think everybody has their own personal story and how you responded to it. But I'm very intentional about not just breaking the rules, but also being very reflective of my culture. So as an African American woman, I can wear African print, I can wear braids in my hair, I haven't wore a hair wrap in the courtroom, but I do wear them to the office. So just being very true to who I am is very much an expression of the type of practitioner that I want other people to see. So Tina.
So no surprise, I take a very sort of similar view, which is I'm genderqueer. I have always been, but that has, throughout my career, has really called to my awareness of what I wear, but never changed. Because if I did, and I walked into a courtroom, into a well, and represented my client in front, had to convince 12 people that what I was saying was what they should know at the end of this case to be true for my client, I would not be comfortable, and I would lose that case for my client. And I will say, though, that I still hear today, mostly from my staff that are newly sort of right out of law school, women of color, saying that women on the bench make these suggestions. You should not wear X. You should wear a jacket. And no one is saying that to the men. Right, nobody's saying like, you should wear a different color suit. And I sort of want to reflect that, at least in New York City and many jurisdictions, by the way, there are laws about gender identity and expression, and in our organizations, and in our public defender offices, and in our DA offices, and in our law firms. We are talking about affirming and what that means. And I think this is a big, big conversation we should be having, and I really appreciate it.
And so Cynthia next, and we have one more. And after these two comments, we're going to move on to the Me Too movement in men.
I just want to say, as women in the courtroom, the way we dress is really appealing to the jurors and the staff in the courtroom, because we look like them in its many iterations, and that we have more credibility because of it, more believable. I feel sorry for male lawyers because they don't have a lot of choices and a lot of variety. Imagine what a judge would say to them if they came in not wearing a traditional suit. So, I mean, I think it's very limiting, and if they were allowed to be a little less rigid in their attire, they would be more appealing to jurors and more credible to them as well.
That's a good point.
I've been a judge for 32 years. I don't recall ever commenting on anyone's attire, but I wanted to say, and this is the important thing, I had 3 children while I was serving as a judge, and that black robe is just great.
I'm sure it would be, so Judge Langford Morris.
I just wanted to add that when I first started as a lawyer in my county, the bench was mostly male, and there was one particular male judge. He demanded that any male lawyer had to wear white shirts. If they showed up at his courtroom with a pink or blue or gray, he didn't care. You had to leave and go get a white shirt and come back. He was known for that. You had to have on a white shirt as a man if you wanted to practice in his courtroom. He was notorious. He's gone on to glory.
He's going, hopefully in a white shirt. Okay.
I've gotten over my frustrations about what to wear and what not to wear in the courtroom, but the place that continues to give me grief is when I go to a prison visitation. And it varies from jurisdiction to jurisdiction. Some places you can't wear an underwire bra. If you're a woman of a certain size, this is a health concern. You can or you can't wear open-toed shoes. The flares of your pants, if you wear pants, have got to be a certain width. If you wear a skirt, it's got to be within so many inches of your knees. The men going through security don't have to take off their neckties, but if I'm wearing a scarf around my neck, I have to take it off. It goes on and on and on. Do you have any suggestions?
No, I think that's a really great topic that we're, it's an issue for the task force. We talked about prison for defense attorneys and public defenders going to see our clients. Sometimes those are the most challenging places for us to be able to do our work. And so I think it's a question of, even within the American Bar Association, like what recommendations can be given. And we understand correctional facilities are a different entity, but a lot of concerns that they raise about safety truly does not have any legitimacy. And it's really based on the personalities of the officers who may be on guard that day, who's doing visitation. So I think it's a great topic. It's one that we talk about a lot within the public defender office. Luckily for me, I was in DC and we had a general counsel who would really challenge our local jail and the prison on those issues. But I think it is a conversation about the different standards for men versus women in meeting with clients in correctional facilities. So I wanted to shift the conversation. So many of us know that the mentorship, within our professions, many have been mentored by men. There have been many people who have taken a vested interest in me and making sure that I was able to advance in my career. And many of those people are men. And we had the conversation within our group about the impact of the Me Too movement on men stepping up to mentor women within the criminal justice profession or within law offices in general. And specifically whether or not that has had a chilling impact on men who do want to develop, I would say, close relationships. Because when you think about your mentor is a person that you would call on the weekend, someone who you can ask questions. But I wanted to hear from the group about what impact has the Me Too movement had on the ability or the desire of men to form close relationships with women in the workplace. And this is a question for men as well, because we want to be real about if it has a chilling impact and how do we deal with it? How do we talk about it? How do we overcome it? Okay. The most courageous man in the room.
Hi, I'm Chris Bellamy. I'm an attorney at Dillon Harwell. So I think this is an interesting topic because we're in it. You know, you hear the old Vietnam vets talk about being in the ish. That's what we are. We're in the ish right now. And so, someone who I'm an only male. I have 3 sisters. Most of my friends are females. So this is an interesting area for me, and I mentor a lot of young female attorneys. It has caused, I wouldn't say a chilling effect, but I do have trust issues sometimes with people I don't know. So I'm less all in from the beginning, and I'm more, let me see what you're really about. Step 1. Step 2, I have to think to myself, what do I want my future to be? Do I want to run for office one day? You know, this conversation I'm having with this person now, this interaction, 20 years from now, what is that going to look like if it's told through a different lens? And so I think those kinds of things that you didn't have to think about before, you have to think about now. And that's not necessarily a bad thing, but I think the Me Too movement is serving a purpose. It's causing people to step back, take a minute, think about their actions, and deciding, unfortunately, sometimes the decision is it worth taking a chance on this person in this particular moment or not? And I think that's really what it boils down to.
Thank you. I think that's very helpful because I think it's a conversation that people are not publicly talking about, but I have definitely heard from males in the profession about really kind of the hesitation or caution of really rethinking. Like every decision is, we already think and overanalyze every step we take, but I think now there is an awareness of men in the profession of, as you said, if it's viewed by a third party 20 years from now, how is that going to be interpreted? But we also want to make sure that we had a conversation because we don't want it to deter people from forming real, authentic relationships that can help women advance in the profession.
Hi, Joy Longnecker here from Nashville. I would say that I do have a fair amount of hesitation in pursuing professional relationships with men, and I would say that because even in instances where I have just been friendly or tried to be gregarious or funny or humorous, that has been taken to mean something that it did not mean and was not intended. And so having had several awkward situations where I have had to make it clear that that was nothing other than a professional kind of attempt at rapport building and like, no, I will not go to dinner with you or anything like that, it has really made me kind of hesitate and take a step back when it comes to my interactions with the male members of the profession, which I think is a shame to your earlier point because it's important for women and men of the bar to be able to interact in a level and in a way that is professional and that can help everyone advance. And I would say as somebody who's in private practice, business development is a huge component and that can be a barrier because I am fearful to a certain extent or very, very hesitant to go after and pursue coffees or lunches or dinners with certain male members of the profession, because I don't want it to be interpreted as something that it decidedly is not.
Yeah, and Joy raises a really good point. We know professionally, and it's not just in the private sector. I think even for those who are public defenders or prosecutors, a lot of decisions about who's going to get certain cases or referrals or who's going to try that murder case in the office is made not in the office. It's made on the golf course or at the bar or during lunch. So relationships matter, and we have to figure out a way, how do we develop those relationships in a healthy way that respects women and allows everyone to feel safe and respected. But we also know that those relationships are really, really important. So we don't want to take away those opportunities that come from forming those relationships. But it is a very delicate question about how do you do it and how do you do it well.
Hi, my name is Dina Wiley. I'm from Atlanta, Georgia, and I was a prosecutor for 20 years with the Department of Justice. So a lot of my mentors were males because there were only 10 African American prosecutors in the antitrust division in the country. And then 3 of us, I think, were women. So, the issue that I'm seeing now that I'm back in private practice is that the males who have been my mentors don't think it applies to them. And so they understand the Me Too movement, but no, that's not me. And so what I've had to do is kind of explain and break down to them, well, you know how you said that associate told her she needs to wear heels to court? That's inappropriate. You know how you told me to just call up this guy, just call him up, go to lunch, I'm a married woman, he's a married man. That's not appropriate anymore if we're not going to go as a group. I don't feel comfortable. You may feel comfortable doing that, but I don't feel comfortable. And so what I'm seeing is that doesn't apply to me. I hear it, and those men are bad, but that's not me, and it is.
I was also with the Department of Justice. Hi, I'm Eileen. I was with the Department of Justice as well for 23 years. I was fortunate enough in the Eastern District of New York to have leaders like Loretta Lynch, Leslie Caldwell, and Beryl Howell, who's now Chief Judge in the DC District Court. I really have to disagree about the appropriateness of having lunch with a married man. I'm married, I have 3 kids. My husband's also married and has 3 kids. And I think nothing of him going to a business lunch with a woman, married or unmarried, and I think nothing of going to a business lunch with a man, solo, married or unmarried. I do it all the time. I think otherwise we risk being in the Mike Pence situation where he needs mother at every single encounter with a woman to protect him. I'm not, I'm not first and foremost to the outside world a sexual being that has to be enshrouded and protected. I can protect myself. And in the New York business world, if I shut myself out from interactions with men, or worse yet, they shut me out, that's going to be hugely detrimental to my business and my career.
Yeah. Well, thank you for the perspective. I think one thing that we're learning is not just about the Me Too movement, but one of the principles behind diversity and inclusion is that you have to figure out what is acceptable to you. So what in the workplace, what some people may feel comfortable with, other people may not. So I think it's really about having the freedom to decide and not to punish or judge either side for their approach to it. But I definitely, I think the diversity of approaches and opinions is really the reason why, that's a reflection of what it means to have a diverse and inclusive workplace. We don't all agree and we don't all approach the world the same way. Judge Denise, and then the gentleman, the courageous gentleman.
It's just a question this time.
Well, let's hear from the courageous gentleman first.
Okay.
I'm better. So my question is this. So when you're getting to know, when you're making that initial interaction, you have that initial interaction, we got 2 totally different perspectives, 2 very professional, obviously successful people. how do you approach the questions? Because I started asking, and then that creates a barrier too, and it's uncomfortable, it becomes awkward, right? Hey, I don't know what you're comfortable with, love to take you to lunch, you can invite people if you want to, I'm not a threat though. You know what I mean? Conversation started, so you can keep that person where they're going.
Well, that's kind of just where I was going to go, because you broached a topic when you spoke earlier about meeting with women. The thing is, I think the Me Too movement is going to have to call for some generalized rules, because I think that men are feeling more cautious. And let's face it, ladies, men are running mostly everything. And so if we are trying to get someplace, whether it's at a firm, a board, a corporation, wherever it might be, in general, mostly everything, the people at the very top are usually men. And so if you shut yourself off from them, you're not going to be able to make inroads. And likewise, I can remember two of my best friends in law school were men. I wasn't dating them. They became hugely successful. They're both deceased today. But I remember them as professors saying they would never meet with a student unless the door was open. They both were married. They kept the door open where their secretary or whoever was outside, people could come in and out. They would never have a closed door meeting with a single female student or married one or whatever, a woman's student. And so I think that some men have thought about these things all along. I mean, this was a really long time ago, but I think that everyone is going to have to think about it and try to define, as you said, April, what's comfortable for you, but also what's a no-no. What is it that you are across the line? You know, the breathing on someone's neck. I mean, I don't know what it is, but we've got to figure out what it is. And it needs to be shared so people will know that they're not crossing the line.
Maybe develop some, what is it, the business cards with the rules on the back?
And just
important that,
I'm sorry.
I think it's important that people are cautious. I think that is a good thing. I think that for so long, even in the beginnings of my career and throughout my career, there were certain things that I was just told you had to accept.
Right.
And I don't think that's okay. And so being cautious is appropriate. Also, changing behaviors is appropriate. Having women in these types of discussions and at the table, and I'm sure, Chris, you talk to women all the time in your circle who can...
In a very professional way.
I know. But I think the conversations are appropriate to have, because I think the day of women just have to put up with certain things in this profession are gone, and they should be. And until we get to a place where we're comfortable saying, I'm not comfortable going to lunch with this man who's married on a sort of, if you want to close this business deal, that's the way you have to do it. Or I'm not comfortable, you know, being sent out to flaunt the way I look in a certain scenario to close a deal. Or having a man who is supposed to be mentoring me being inappropriate. Those things aren't okay. And now is the time for us to have these discussions. Now is the time for people to be cautious. And I think it's a good thing that you are engaging in understanding that some things could be uncomfortable for the person you're trying to build a relationship with. And it is on the parties to have those, to work through that. I think that's an important thing. And if that's what the Me Too movement brings about in this profession, then it's a worthy bringing about.
And just to clarify my statement, I wasn't uncomfortable because it's a man and a married man. I was uncomfortable because I was being told that the initial contact needed to be by me. When if that contact needs to be made, why aren't you making it? And I'm more comfortable reaching out to somebody maybe on a call first, or at a group event first, or you know, and in answer to your question, Chris, I don't think there's anything wrong with asking someone to join you for lunch, but I think it's also okay for that woman to say no.
Oh, yeah.
And, you know, it's just that women have an instinct, and sometimes we get the bells, that is a creepy guy, not to say it's you, that is a creepy guy, warning, you know, danger Will Robinson kind of warning. And, you but.
Right. And I just want to follow up and then go to Kim. One really good thing, like Martesha was saying, like one positive thing from the Me Too is really about maybe we should be asking questions of people. Maybe you should ask, what are your pronouns? You shouldn't assume what people's gender identity is. And different steps that we can take in order to create a inclusive and diverse work environment. So sometimes there's nothing wrong with taking the time to ask the questions and to get to know what people's comfort level is to make sure that we all support each other in being as inclusive as possible.
Well, this is
It's home.
just an echo of many of the things that I've heard today. And I agree, this is one of the most important discussions brought up by the Me Too movement and the development of those rules, if you will, and how this is shaped. But it takes this kind of discussion and this kind of sharing, and we've heard so many things today, but one of the things, being in criminal justice practice as a prosecutor, I had lots of interaction with law enforcement, and I only bring that up because law enforcement, if we want to talk about experiences, women in law enforcement can share so much with us. When I first started practice years ago, the women, law enforcement that were there could not ride with the men. They couldn't ride with them. And then later, probably maybe mid-90s, they let the women get in the cars with them, right? And so they were face-to-face with that same interaction we're talking about. They're on third shift, the middle of the night, there's nothing maybe going on. And I feel like reaching out, not just to law enforcement, but other women in other professions, because we can lead this. We're lawyers, right? We can look to systemic changes that maybe can make a difference. Changes in the rules, changes in the law. But thinking about here today about other professions women have been in, that they are encountering the same things and also expanding our discussion.
Right. So we have time for one more.
Hi, my name is Sunny Eaton. I'm a criminal defense lawyer here in Nashville. I went to law school in Washington, D.C., which is a very formal place to practice law. Those courts are very formal. If you see a judge on the corner crossing the street, you go the opposite direction. If a judge sees a lawyer they know in a restaurant, they leave the restaurant. It's that level of formal. So coming from that environment to the Nashville, Tennessee environment was a shock to my system as a new lawyer, because it's so casual and it's so informal, although that's changing a lot. And as a young lawyer, I often found myself really struggling and did a terrible job of it to balance that line between being overly friendly or flirting back in those situations in court rather than be perceived as a bitch or someone that wasn't warm. Because in the criminal system particularly, it's all about helping our clients however we can help our clients. And there's a lot of moving and shaking going on, and and then there's the southern addition to that of being overly friendly, and it's a difficult line. And I'm an open lesbian and always have been in my career. And straight women, let me tell you, if you think that these men sometimes take liberties in being too friendly with you, try being a lesbian woman in the courthouse, because it gives them an added level of thinking that they can be casual with you and say things to you that are completely inappropriate. And I appreciate that you would say, I don't know how to be in these situations, because I don't think any of us should be expected to know how. As an older lawyer now, I'm ashamed of the decisions I made and what side of those lines I often fell on as a young lawyer, because no one discussed that with me. No one modeled it to me. We didn't have role-playing discussions of when a court officer is being too flirty. What's the appropriate way to respond, especially when they are the door between you and your client. And I think the only way that we get there, especially as older lawyers, more professionals, is to not just model these behaviors, but to have these discussions. And I don't say that in some nebulous way, like we should have diversity training and those things. I'm talking about these real discussions, real role playing. How do you ask someone to lunch? How do you accept that? How do you make that appropriate? Because I had no idea, and I don't think it's something that comes to us naturally, especially in this type of system.
Right. And, you know, I think that's a great kind of closing remark to really highlight why the ABA Women in Criminal Justice Task Force was created. There are not enough spaces for us to have these very candid conversations. And so we are committed to having the conversations about professional development and really the challenges, not just women, but even women of color. About a year ago, I was asked to speak on a panel about microaggressions and how it plays into like the Me Too movement. And to be honest, it was a very challenging conversation because I was one of the, I think it was 2 women of color. I was an African American and there was a Latino sister who was in the room with us. But we were presenting to a room full of white practitioners who practice civil legal services and public defense. And we all know that oftentimes people who do work in that space are really committed to social justice. But also as a woman of color, I also realize that in working in those spaces, there's also so much work to do internally within the public interest community. And so when we talk about microaggressions, oftentimes the challenges that I even faced in a public defender office as a woman of color, you would think that those challenges would not take place because they're public defenders, right? You're fighting for social justice, but we all have work to do. And so creating these spaces to have these conversations, it may look different depending on where you are, whether it's Washington, D.C. or whether it's Topeka, Kansas, but we know that women need the space to have the conversations. And so we are asking you all to join us over the next few years, the ABA Criminal Justice section, and having those conversations. So the ABA Women in Criminal Justice Task Force, we're having listening sessions, but also the section in general, we're committed to diversity and inclusion, and we want to model the way within the American Bar Association of how do we even create a diverse and inclusive section within the American Bar Association. So I want to thank everyone for joining us this morning.